With so many movies and stories dictating pop culture, it seems absurd that no nutjob has ever decided to put on a costume and actually patrol the streets. The superhero fantasy should be the perfect escape from the boredom of everyday life. For some, delusions of grandeur speak louder, and the leap of faith happens. It is the exact moment when excitement completely blinds any basic instinct of self-preservation. The end is tragic and definitive, merely the devastating result of an unstable mind colliding with reality while trying to prove that urban legends could become real. But the great irony of the situation is that the victim of this disaster isn't even our protagonist. That nutjob who jumped was just collateral damage, a sad copycat. The one truly responsible for inspiring that madness is going through something absurdly worse. Playing Vigilante against the underworld didn't bring fame. It only resulted in extreme and humiliating torture. In agony and waiting for the worst to happen, he decides to take a step back. His mind searches for the beginning of it all, trying to map out exactly where he destroyed his own future. The origin of this disaster doesn't involve experiments or magic. It stems from the suffocating routine of Dave, an invisible teenager who inhabited the absolute limbo of mediocrity. Trying to force any romantic approach went miserably wrong. The girl destroys the illusions he created, exposing just how bizarre and pathetic his attitude really was. Even the greatest tragedy of his life was completely ordinary. His mother passed away from a simple medical issue, with no villains or major events to forge the character of a vigilante. With such a dull life, the world of fiction became his main escape valve. He and his friends would spend hours consuming pop culture and debating the logic of the impossible. In the midst of this immersion, a seed sprouts. He finally verbalizes the big question that would change everything. Why does the real world refuse to imitate fiction? The alienation is absolute. The idea of growing up to have a mediocre job terrified him much more than taking risks, and he decides his existence needed to carry some weight. The moment of truth arrives, and the project goes from his head into real life. The makeshift costume now demands courage, marking the end of the invisible boy. The new identity acts as an absurd injection of self-confidence. His loneliness is masked by an inflated ego that convinces him he's invincible on the streets. To make up for the total lack of superpowers, he focuses on a practical approach. He changes his lifestyle and starts turning his own body into a functional tool. The opportunity for his first trial by fire comes in the form of a minor offense, a seemingly easy scenario to gain street experience without ending up in the hospital. But his inexperience consumes him. With zero tactics, he throws a cheap, immature insult to the wind in a desperate hope to establish some moral authority over the criminals. The result is a complete failure. Instead of commanding respect, his attitude only generates mockery and confusion, proving that to the real world, he's just a bad joke. Fueled by pure adrenaline and with no chance of backing down, he takes the initiative. The first strike of his career crosses the line that separates fantasy from real violence. Beginner's luck runs out fast, and a basic mistake leaves his guard open. The blow he takes in return instantly shatters any illusion of heroic invincibility. Defenseless, what started as a fight turns into a cowardly beatdown. The criminals unleash all their anger, punishing the stupid intruder who made the worst mistake of his life. The brutality reaches its extreme in an agonizing second where fiction dies for good. With no healing factor or escape plan, he feels the blade go in, realizing he lost his life right there. Satisfied, the attackers vanish from the scene and leave the problem behind. The moment that should have been glorious turns into the harsh reality of bleeding alone among the trash. Driven solely by the instinct not to die, he gathers what little strength he has left. His focus shifts to dragging himself in indescribable agony until he finds someone to call for help. But the metropolis is unforgiving, and people's indifference hurts more than the wounds. His grotesque appearance repels the society he tried to protect, and absolutely no one stops to help. In a brutal irony of fate, his silent plea for help leads him into the middle of motorized chaos. The last shred of control over his life is annihilated when he is violently run over. To make the tragedy worse, the panicked driver chooses not to help and flees the scene. With no dramatic rescue, all that remains is the selfishness of someone saving their own skin. Smashed on the asphalt with irreversible spinal damage, a dark irony takes over his mind. Even in agony, his greatest fear isn't dying, but the brutal humiliation of being found in this pathetic costume and his own father's ultimate disappointment. Dave regains consciousness in a living nightmare. The reality of trying to play superhero finally exacts its deadly toll. The initial shock turns to panic when he sees his family staring at him. He fears his double life as a vigilante has been discovered. But the public humiliation turns into relief. To the crowd, he wasn't a failed vigilante, just a random crime victim. The medical reality, however, is relentless. Without magical healing factors, his broken body requires brutal interventions and an agonizing recovery. The diagnosis hammers a painful truth into Dave's mind. The physical damage is permanent, and his false sense of youthful invincibility dies right then and there. The dread of lasting damage makes him pray to God from his hospital bed. In a moment of despair, he swears to cut the problem at its root and give up heroism for good. The consequences leave permanent scars. His body now relies on metal reinforcements, becoming a lifelong reminder of his monumental stupidity. The weight of guilt crushes him once he returns home. Seeing his father buried in a financial hole to pay for his care makes him completely break down. Driven by anger and regret, he decides to keep his survival promise. He initiates an absolute purge, destroying every trace of the hero identity he created. But rationality doesn't stand a chance against adrenaline withdrawal. The moment he gets his mobility back, he suffers a harsh relapse and puts the mask back on. His patrol turns into an embarrassing disaster. The public doesn't see a relentless savior. They just see a weirdo prowling around a residential area. The whole neighborhood turns against him. In a matter of minutes, Dave goes from wannabe hero to public enemy number one in his own neighborhood. The masked vigilante's grand return ends in a humiliating escape. The fantasy crumbles as he is forced to run from outraged ordinary citizens just to avoid getting lynched. And while fleeing, he runs straight into a real-life nightmare. Dave stumbles right into a ruthless underworld beatdown happening in the middle of an alley. The attackers offer the kid a golden opportunity. All he has to do is turn around and pretend he saw nothing to make it out alive. But something inside him finally snaps. Knowing that the guilt of walking away would be worse than any beating, he refuses to play the coward. Logic is thrown out the window. Driven by pure instinct to do the right thing, he launches a blind, suicidal assault against the gang. That's when the lingering effects of his accident become a bizarre advantage. His severe nerve damage numbs the pain, allowing him to fight with unreal aggression. His total disregard for his own life shocks the thugs. The kid who used to get beat up at school is suddenly throwing professional criminals off balance. The street quickly becomes a spectacle. The connected crowd doesn't bother to help or call the cops, choosing instead to film the brutality as pure, free entertainment. Adrenaline, however, doesn't armor his surgically weakened body. Reality catches up, and he begins to buckle under the weight of the blows. But fuck the classic superhero code. To survive without superpowers, he throws morality out the window and goes straight for his enemy's most vulnerable spots. The retaliation escalates to an absurd level. Dave completely loses control, fighting back with a desperate cruelty that shocks even the gang. The thugs' cockiness finally crumbles. Terrified by the kid's psychotic determination, they abandon their target just to avoid ending up in the morgue. The victory leaves him utterly shattered, but the only thing that matters to him in that moment is making sure his suicidal sacrifice actually saved the man. And the answer erases all the trauma from that night. That genuine display of gratitude acts as a trigger, and his addiction to playing hero comes rushing back, taking over him completely. All around them, the crowd realizes the value of the spectacle they just recorded. One of the bystanders perfectly understands the explosive potential of catching that massacre on camera. With a single click, Dave's anonymity is gone. The carnage is immortalized online, turning the legend of the masked vigilante into an unstoppable, irreversible global phenomenon. The raw footage of that brutal night hits the internet. All of Dave's fury and desperation are now public knowledge, recorded unfiltered for anyone to hit play. He cements his status not as an untouchable superhuman, but as a regular guy, someone who bleeds, who gets beaten to a pulp, but simply refuses to back down. The curiosity snowballs out of control. Dave finally understands the magnitude of the monster he's created, going from an invisible teenager to a global urban legend. But all this massive exposure comes at a heavy price. While the hero gets lost in his own vanity, the real bosses of the city start paying attention to this new player. Back in the reality of school, the kid's social dynamics change drastically. The secret he hides under his clothes acts as a psychological armor against the hell that is high school. And the ultimate prize of this new phase is naturally getting closer to the girl of his dreams. His alter ego becomes the perfect bridge bridge to establish a connection with her. It turns out the school rumor mill completely distorted the events of the past. The bizarre gossip going around about the beating he took changes everything. The story has already spread to everyone, and the reason for the girl's interest becomes painfully clear. It's all a massive misunderstanding mixed with sympathy. It's not a crush, it's pure pity. And that's when Dave makes a decision. His desperation to be near her is so strong that he chooses to swallow his pride and fully embrace the lie to maintain that closeness. The double life starts to take its toll. The guilt of hiding the truth and lying to his own father, a guy he truly admires, weighs heavily on the kid's conscience. Even so, hyped up by his street fame, he decides to step things up. It's time to fully embrace the fantasy and act like a real vigilante on actual missions. But he accepts his own insignificance when faced with the unforgiving rules of the streets. His only option is to swallow his pride and take the most humiliating, yet safest approach to operate. With this newfound influence, he decides to professionalize things on a smaller scale. The idea now is to set up a makeshift ops center and respond to direct cries for help. His first case is chosen, but the real motivation is far from altruistic. He prioritizes this mission purely hoping to help his crush and score a date as a reward. But the danger escalates exponentially once he arrives. The target isn't who he expected, and the invitation into the apartment feels like an obvious trap. The henchman's joking is cut short when the real target steps in. He kills the funny mood and instantly establishes who calls the shots around there. It dawns on the rest of the group exactly who he is. Confirming he's just the guy from the viral video proves he isn't a lethal threat, let alone an undercover cop. The dealer smells fear and doubles down. He dares the masked kid to show him what happens if he doesn't comply, calling his bluff on the spot. The verbal intimidation turns physical in an instant. The target corners Dave, and the entire crew moves in to block any escape routes, setting up the perfect ambush. Even while completely terrified and outnumbered, Dave makes the worst and bravest decision of the night. Instead of backing down, he stands his ground and faces the threat head-on. Survival instincts kick in out of pure desperation. He drops the heroic act and resorts to a dirty self-defense trick to blind the gang leader. But the gap in physical strength is unforgiving. The kid is lifted up and tossed around like a rag doll, proving that blind courage doesn't make up for a complete lack of training. The gang leader finally loses his patience, and playtime is over. He gets ready to execute the kid right then and there, marking the end of the line for the fake hero. But the fatal blow never reaches Dave. A relentless external force enters the fray, catching the leader and the entire crew completely off guard, shifting the tide of the battle. Salvation arrives in the most unbelievable way. It's a child vigilante who, unlike him, isn't there to play pretend, but to eliminate the criminals with absolute precision. The girl takes absolute control of the situation. With pure lethal technique, she dictates the pace of the ambush, making it clear to the henchmen that no one is getting a second chance. Desperation drives the gang's biggest brute to take the initiative. He charges forward with everything he has to crush the intruder, throwing all his weight against her. But size means nothing against elite training. The henchman's brutal charge fails miserably, dismantled in a fraction of a second by the girl's deadly efficiency. The slaughter has officially begun. While the vigilante challenges the survivors, Dave learns the hard way that, in the real world, the true heroes are just as terrifying as the monsters they hunt. The execution begins without mercy. The gang, who previously thought they had the upper hand, is quickly wiped out by a girl with surgical lethality. Dave watches it all, completely paralyzed. He finally understands the chasm that separates an amateur in a colorful suit from a true killing machine. Without a pause for reflection, the vigilante dominates the entire space. She dictates the rhythm of the massacre, stopping any chance of a counterattack from the gang dead in its tracks. The little assassin focuses on her last target without an ounce of remorse. She judges and condemns, making it clear there is no room for excuses or mercy. With the final enemy down, the execution is complete. For Dave, the weight of reality crushes his mind, realizing he has become an accomplice to a bloodbath. Suddenly, the atmosphere changes completely. The lethal posture vanishes, and she faces Dave with a disturbing casualness, as if they were just co-workers. But the attempt to connect is quickly shut down. She ends the conversation and vanishes into the night, proving that Dave barely survived his first day in the underworld. The encounter reveals the girl doesn't work alone, forming a lethal duo. The most bizarre part is the casualness with which they treat a brutal massacre like routine work. The true predators go on their way. They operate in a completely parallel reality, where there is no room for bored kids playing hero. Left behind, loneliness weighs heavily on Dave as the adrenaline evaporates. He has a crushing epiphany about his own fragility, shattering his heroic illusion. His stealthy retreat from the scene is fraught with guilt. Dave understands that his mere presence there links him directly to a multiple homicide. Absolute despair consumes him with terrifying visions of the future. The burden of becoming the prime suspect and ending up in the prison system crushes his sanity, but the universe cuts him some slack. The authorities end up ruling the massacre as a simple gang turf war, erasing Dave's presence from the scene. Despite the relief, he still has to deal with the girl he initially tried to protect. He will try to prove that he is not a cold-blooded killer. However, his explanation backfires, and she assumes he's a ruthless killer. She promises to cover his tracks, cementing this scary and fake reputation. That's the last straw. The psychological toll and the terror of the true underworld push Dave to make the definitive decision to retire his alter ego. Browsing online, he realizes his viral fame only spawned a shallow trend. His legacy isn't justice, it's just regular people playing dress-up. Without the mask, he is forced to return to the mediocre reality of high school. He remains trapped in the web of lies he spun just to stay friends with the girl. Swallowing every ounce of his pride, he plays along with her weirdness. Dave realizes how hostage he is to his own need for validation just to keep her around. The paralyzing fear of being implicated speaks louder. In an act of self-preservation and cowardly clarity, he buries his heroic identity entirely. Seeking refuge in the old comic book shop, reality catches up with him. A friend reveals that a local rich kid is directly tied to the top of the city's organized crime. The irony of a mafia heir being a mild-mannered teen shocks the group. For Dave, it's a chilling reminder that the bloody underworld lurks just beneath everyday life. Meanwhile, the crime syndicate goes into crisis. The mob bosses realize that the dozens of recent casualties are part of a systematic dismantling of their empire. The boss's doubts are settled when hard evidence is brought to the table. The underworld discovers the visual identity of the duo that has become their new nightmare. Amidst the desperation to find the culprits, Kick-Ass's name comes up. His accidental internet fame almost turns Dave into the Mafia's #1 target. By some miracle, Dave's public decision to quit saves his life. The mobsters deduce that he is nothing more than a harmless joke looking for attention. Murderous rage takes over the leader. An order for absolute extermination is issued, mobilizing the criminal machine to hunt down the real vigilantes. But the vigilantes are miles ahead. While the Mafia holds meetings, a crucial informant of theirs has already been captured and broken during an interrogation. The criminal hands over the entire network of names and addresses to the duo, swearing loyalty. But he realizes too late that mercy plays no part in this war. With the trump card of information secured, the duo breaks any promise of clemency. They never plan to leave loose ends and decide to finish the job. In a frantic last-ditch attempt to survive, the informant plays his final card. He tries to renegotiate for his life, promising to reveal even more of the underworld's dirty secrets. The offer is ignored, and the execution is carried out. The methodical disposal of the criminal confirms that the crusade against organized crime leaves no witnesses. They treat the man's final moments of terror with utter contempt, almost like a joke. This absolute emotional detachment proves just how sinister the duo's conditioning really is. Dave's legacy takes a twisted turn when a masked copycat goes viral online. Seeing this rookie grab the spotlight sparks a mix of envy and anger in the former hero. The public quickly embraces the new vigilante. Watching the media and fans treat his old alter ego like an amateur rough draft absolutely crushes Dave's ego. With his pride wounded, he decides to come out of retirement. Driven by a need to prove his worth, Dave hits the streets again, fueled by his rival's success. But his hunt for crime becomes a routine of failures. Every actionless night only deepens his sense of inferiority, breeding an unhealthy obsession with the copycat. Unable to accept living in the shadows, Dave creates an online channel and issues a challenge. He demands the new hero face the original vigilante head-on. The meetup is highly tense, with Dave's boiling anger ready to explode at the usurper stepping onto his turf. To Dave's surprise, his supposed rival flips the script. Instead of picking a fight, the rookie acts like a fanboy, putting the trailblazing vigilante on a pedestal. With the tension diffused and his ego restored, a game changer alters the course of the night. The rookie proposes an official team-up, Once they are on their private patrol, the gap between them becomes painfully obvious. Seeing his partner's cutting-edge tech and limitless resources turns Dave's envy into sheer awe. The rookie's mask of unshakable confidence shatters. He confesses that he's driven by fear, proving to be just as amateur and terrified as Dave. This subverted expectation sparks immediate empathy. Dave realizes his partner is just another nerd misled by pop culture, exactly like him. Their joint patrols focus purely on reaping the perks of fame. They stroll around like untouchable celebrities in a theatrical display that strokes both of their egos. However, their fantasy bubble bursts upon colliding with the real world. A genuine crisis erupts in their path, far beyond the duo's fun little script. The desperate public spots their colorful suits and projects blind hope onto them. The crowd dumps the responsibility of a rescue directly into their laps. The rookie panics and wants to run, but Dave finds himself cornered. Refusing to shatter their heroic charade in front of an audience, he makes a suicidal decision. The point of no return is crossed. Driven only by the weight of the title they claimed for themselves, the two dive blindly into a catastrophic, out-of-control scenario, crossing the definitive line between common sense and outright suicide. While searching the deadly scene, Dave finally finds the rescue target. The discovery hits him with the absurd realization that he's risking his life for a pathetic reason. But time simply runs out. The structure gives way and collapses, crushing any chance of escape and springing the trap for good. Outside, utter chaos takes over. The crowd that demanded the rescue watches in shock at what appears to be the tragic end of the two vigilantes. Trapped inside, Dave knows it's entirely his fault. He's on the verge of accepting he just dragged an amateur to his grave until a sudden twist occurs. Salvation comes from the real world. Professional firefighters burst into their teenage delusion, bringing an immense wave of relief that leaves Dave paralyzed. The irony of fate is relentless as they step out the exit. Their near-fatal failure inside instantly transforms into triumphant glory embraced by the crowd. Surrounded by public adoration, their ego trip reaches astronomical heights. This insane validation elevates the duo to urban legends, turning their delusion into reality. Except this monumental exposure echoes far beyond the streets. Their overblown stardom blips on the radar of high-level crime bosses, painting huge targets on their backs. Dave's delusion is abruptly cut short. He gets a harsh reality check when he's ambushed by someone with absolutely zero patience for his amateur hour. The fantasy crumbles with a fatal warning. Dave's reckless fame has drawn the wrath of the real Mafia, placing a lethal target on his back, all thanks to his own ego. The ruthless assassin who crossed paths with Dave wasn't always this way. At 10 years old, the only thing dominating her mind was sheer panic at her own father's actions. The man tries to rationalize the madness of the situation. The impending trauma is treated as if it were just a theoretical lesson, minimizing the extreme pain he is about to inflict on his own daughter. And that's where the line of what's acceptable is crossed without hesitation. Her innocence is brutally ripped away all at once, forcefully replaced by the harsh reality of the war her father chose to wage. The macabre theater reveals its true purpose: to completely eradicate the fear of death. He needed to prove that preparation overcomes panic, forging an artificial confidence through trauma. The cycle is completed by a bizarre reward system. He mixes physical torture with ordinary childhood prizes, completely warping the girl's perception of affection, obedience, and survival. Her desires are completely rewritten by this indoctrination. The genuine joy that should come from toys is replaced by a fascination with tools of carnage. When it's time to put it all into practice against real criminals, the dynamic doesn't change. The father coordinates the chaos from a safe distance, treating actual raid missions as if they were pop quizzes. That scared child was completely erased, giving way to a lethal machine. She now dishes out extreme violence with the same ease as answering a school question. The mobsters realize too late that they are being hunted by an unstoppable force. They've become mere target practice, gunned down while the girl calmly answers her father's questions about weapons history. The reality check hits what's left of the gang. They weren't attacked by a tactical squad, but decimated by a science project of vengeance disguised as a little girl. The ultimate goal of this crusade is laid bare. Using endless resources, the father funds cutting-edge equipment to prepare for the inevitable showdown against the organized crime syndicate. The original wound that motivated all of this is the loss of her mother. The girl secretly believes that ending her revenge against the mob will bring winning back the chance to be a normal family. But the sudden fame of amateur vigilantes arises as an opportunity in the girl's mind. She sees internet heroes as the ideal backup for her family's suicide mission. Dave's illusion of safety is completely crushed. The lethal duo invades his room effortlessly, making it clear just how vulnerable and amateurish he really is compared to professionals. With the upper hand established and rubbing the boy's family secrets in his face, the father decides it's time to permanently recruit Dave into the bloody side of this war. But Dave tries to impose a moral limit, desperately clinging to the code of conduct of classic vigilantes. He refuses to cross the line into murder. The true face of the alliance is revealed. The father isn't asking for help, he's demanding it, blackmailing Dave with the threat of destroying his anonymity and his life. Alone, Dave's mind short-circuits. His instinct screams in genuine panic, but a sick part of his brain is ecstatic because his nerdy delusion of being part of a team has materialized. The ultimatum is passed along. Dave reveals to his new heroic partner the gravity of the hole they've dug themselves into, turning their alliance into a forced recruitment by assassins. The problem gains a layer of pure ego. Dave's partner feels personally offended by the subordination, truly believing that their digital fame gives them the right to dictate the rules. Meanwhile, the father severely questions the decision to involve amateur kids in a lethal hunt. To him, relying on internet boys is an unacceptable risk. But the girl knows exactly how to get around her mentor's strictness. A subtle emotional appeal is enough to ensure she can keep her new pawns on the board. On the other side, Dave's partner makes a bold decision. He decides to embrace the insanity, seeing the assassins as the brutal weapons they needed to empower their team. Dave and his partner walk to the strategic meeting. Dave remains trapped in his teenage fantasy, excitedly discussing what the future of their superhero team will look like, until the fantasy shatters, without any warning. Dave's illusion of heroism is swallowed up the instant he faces the harsh reality on the other side of the door. The assassin duo, who operated like an invincible force, has fallen into a perfect ambush. The ruthless mentor and his killing machine are now just prisoners on the brink of death in the hands of the mob. Absolute panic paralyzes Dave. Reality hits hard as he processes that he marched completely voluntarily and fully exposed right into his own slaughterhouse. Crushed by despair upon seeing the end of the line, the mentor abandons all of his militaristic doctrine. In sheer agony, he places his last spark of survival on the shoulders of the amateur kid. But any delusion of a rescue dies in that same second. The betrayal reveals itself in a cold, swift, and irreversible manner, cutting hope off at the root. Dave's ally takes off his mask and proves he was always the mob's Trojan Horse. The reality check crushes Dave. He was never an inspiring hero. He was just the perfect bait for organized crime to win the war. Reality finally hits Dave. The humiliation of being held captive by the boy he trusted most shatters the illusion that this was just a game. Mindy realizes the disaster of their trap. The realization that their inside ally is the mob heir crushes any chance of bluffing. Knowing that submission means certain death, she decides to restart the fight. Pure killer instinct takes over to try and carve out an escape route, but her courage violently collides with armed reality. The Syndicate's numerical superiority ends the retaliation instantly and ruthlessly. Being violently blasted out of the battlefield seals the girl's defeat. The brutal fall ends years of preparation in an abyss of failure. The contrast in the room is nauseating. The new mob boss celebrates the murder like a cheap trophy, while empathy is non-existent on the enemy side. Far from the public eye, Dave and the mentor are taken to the heart of the mob empire. That is where the ultimate reckoning will take place. The traitor makes a point of humiliating Dave, exposing him as nothing more than a delusional teenager. The ambush and the fake friendship were coldly calculated for months. The extreme torture session begins, and a maximum voltage charge surges mercilessly through Dave. The entire illusion of being a fearless vigilante turns to dust in a single second of agony. Completely broken, the kid sings like a canary. He spills every detail he knows while the mob boss just listens, impassive. But the extreme pain technique fails on the veteran. The older partner endures the mob's worst without giving up a single useful piece of information, frustrating their torturers. The excuse that he's a former cop seeking revenge doesn't fly with the top brass. The charade has so many holes that the criminals demand to know the truth. The myth crumbles on the cold floor. The mentor finally admits he was never a cop, just an ordinary, frustrated guy trapped in a mediocre life. The revelation of how the crusade was funded is almost a sick joke. He had liquidated a collection of rare comic books to bankroll a heroic delusion. The pathetic story doesn't move anyone at all. The underworld boss has no room for mercy and immediately seals everyone's fate. And in a swift, cold instant, the great mentor is eliminated. No epic sacrifice, just the grotesque end of a man who lied to himself until the very last second. With the loaded gun aimed at him, the teenager realizes he's next in line. His survival instinct screams louder than the paralyzing panic. In a suicidal act to buy time, he bets on the criminal's pride. Instead of begging, Dave fires off the worst insults at the henchman to disrupt the execution. The bait works perfectly. The mobster's fragile ego buys the boy precious seconds of life as he takes a brutal beating instead of a bullet. And this is where his hidden trump card saves him. Due to a previous accident that left him with titanium plates and nerve damage, Dave can barely feel the pain from the blows. The uncontrolled fury throws him so violently that his bindings loosen. The fall creates the only window of opportunity he needed. With no gear, he improvises with what's left. Dave gets up and turns a piece of the wreckage into his only defensive weapon, but the desperate rebellion is crushed in a second. The massive gap in strength prevails, and Dave is instantly neutralized, making his death now inevitable. However, the trigger is never pulled. A sudden interruption strikes the room, tearing the assassin's attention away in a split second. On the floor, Dave finally understands where his salvation came from. The urban legend of the mentor's daughter was real, and she survived to settle the score. Without giving the mob a single second to process the invasion, the girl begins her payback. Her attack is surgical and lethal against the men who killed her father, and the henchmen are exterminated in the darkness without being able to react. The mystery of how she survived is revealed. Wearing heavy ballistic protection, she withstood the firing squad and faked her death to follow the kidnappers back to their hideout. On the upper floors, the crime boss was celebrating his victory too soon. The tranquility of his safe haven is shattered by a direct warning over the radio. With lethal mockery, the girl rubs the ultimate humiliation in the leader's face. An entire empire built on blood will be torn down by a single child seeking revenge. Before the final climb, the two survivors forge a pact amidst the carnage. They join forces, cementing the alliance needed for the final act. Using trauma and grief as fuel, the duo begins the decisive ascent toward the penthouse. The hunt for the top of the mob's food chain has truly begun. The final destination is just ahead. The Genovese family empire looms over the city, where everything first went wrong. That's where the ultimate reckoning is going down today. Inside, physical exhaustion hits hard. Knowing that willpower isn't enough, Mindy pulls out a last resort emergency measure left by her father to launch the counterattack. The substance's effect is overwhelming. Every trace of hesitation is wiped out, hacking the wounded girl's mind to turn her into a machine calibrated exclusively for slaughter. High above, the firing squad is already waiting. They take a deep breath with their fingers on the triggers, swearing to turn any intruder into minced meat before they take their first step. Dave and Mindy exchange one last silent nod. He accepts that he's probably not making it out of there alive, but he's determined to take as many goons to the grave with him as possible. The mob leaves no room for defense, unleashing a torrential hail of lead. They fire blindly in pure desperation to neutralize the threat without having to look it in the eye. But the payback breaks all the rules. The girl flips the dynamic in a single second, dedicating hell to her father's memory in a brutal counterattack. The duo advances mercilessly over the ruins of the security forces. Without losing focus on the destruction, the girl processes the floor plan and locks onto her priority target. At the back of the floor, the architect of their misery realizes his father's untouchable empire has fallen. Cornered, the traitor drops his mask of arrogance and goes into absolute panic. Dave finally comes face to face with the kid who caused this whole nightmare. His exhaustion fades away in the face of the urgent need to put an end to this story. Refusing to play the victim, Dave charges forward. He uses his opponent's arrogance to strike first, completely breaking the rhythm of the guy who thought he was in control. Pain shatters the criminal heir's illusion of power. In the blink of an eye, the upper hand shifts, and genuine despair takes the place of his tough guy act. The huge threat that made Dave's life a living hell completely crumbles. The empire empire falls, revealing only a terrified kid who played with other people's lives and just had his game shut down. Meanwhile, the execution runs wild in the hallways. Mindy starts collecting the debt for every night of preparation, unleashing cold, unprompted strikes against the elite guards. The speed of the attacks is terrifying. Following a single collective mistake by the mob, the entire line of defense is wiped out simultaneously as if it had never existed. She charges through the doors, entirely consumed by the stimulant's effect. With no trace of a child left, Mindy acts like a force of nature on automatic extermination mode. But physical exhaustion finally finds an opening. One of the guards takes advantage of a slip in her advance and manages to neutralize her main advantage, pinning her down. The punishment dealt to the immobilized girl is ruthless. The difference in raw strength becomes clear, destroying any chance of defense she tries to muster under the heavy blows. The goons, however, forgot one detail: she wasn't alone. Dave arrives at the exact critical moment, watching her back to try to even the odds and save her. With no clean heroism or hesitation, he acts. Dave makes a cruel, calculated move to inflict maximum agony, aiming for the immediate incapacitation of the brute. The unexpected attack destabilizes their formation and breaks Mindy out of her restraint. Giving her room to breathe was the last and worst mistake the mobster could ever make. Her lethal instincts come roaring back, and payback is delivered without mercy. The man finds out too late that underestimating the enemy is a death sentence. What follows is the systematic slaughter of everything still breathing on the floor. Without any margin for error, the final elimination wipes out the last remnants of enemy resistance. As silence takes over, the Genovese Empire ceases to exist. The mission objective is completed with absolute success, bringing an end to the night of carnage. With the battle won, the chemical cocktail loses its grip on her system. The reality check hits hard, and the killing machine programming abruptly shuts down. The elite assassin facade crumbles, making way for all the built-up grief. All the revenge in the world can't hide the pain of a girl who lost her father figure forever. Faced with that intense emotional breakdown, Dave goes beyond the vigilante role. He provides the only human and emotional support she has left amidst the destruction. With the cycle of violence ended, the next logical step is trying to fix the past. The decision is to reintegrate the girl into society and give her back a normal family life. But deeply rooted military training doesn't vanish overnight. When taunts and bullying cross the line at school, it serves as the perfect trigger to awaken her dormant fury. The consequences for the bullies are brutal. The shattered expectations establish a new school hierarchy, making it clear that lethal instincts aren't erased by good manners. Meanwhile, a moral crossroads weighs heavily on Dave. He gathers his courage and decides to come clean to Katie, determined to put an end to the lie that brought them together. The main bombshell finally drops. Dave admits he made up the gay persona as a desperate, cowardly tactic of an insecure guy who thought he'd never have a chance with her. The expectation of a romantic ending crumbles instantly. Katie's shock turns into pure outrage when she realizes that all the intimacy they shared was nothing but a disgusting manipulation. Consumed by anger, she demands immediate physical retaliation. She sicks her real boyfriend on Dave, who panics as he tries to come up with one last pathetic excuse. The excuse does no good, and the outcome is brutal. Dave gets a vicious beating in front of everyone, learning the hard way that clearing your conscience sometimes only brings pure pain. Despite the absolute failure in his civilian life, the seed Dave planted took root on a global scale. Amateur heroism blossomed and turned into a movement of legions on the streets. The whole of society has adapted to this new normal. Citizens now turn to the new masked icons completely naturally, making a new dynamic of street justice official. But every rise brings an inevitable counterweight. In the shadows, a bitter mind fueled by pure hatred plans to use anonymity to destroy this new vigilante empire by its roots. The heir to the Genovese Empire abandons all hesitation and embraces his macabre new purpose. The kids playing hero are about to clash with a psychopath thirsty for revenge. The game has changed completely. With the cartel breathing down their necks, Mindy decides to fully embrace the role of mentor. She realizes that Dave needs to stop being an amateur, and rule number one is simple: no whining. The difference in their combat skill levels becomes brutally clear. Every mistake is punished on the spot. Dave pays dearly for thinking that wearing a spandex suit was enough to fight. Imitate. Dave reaches his absolute limit. His pride crumbles along with his body. It finally dawns on him that the mess he got himself into is far more dangerous than his fantasy suggested. Mindy gives him an ultimatum, offering an out. But, against every instinct of self-preservation, the boy makes the worst possible decision. His obsession with vigilantism speaks louder, and he chooses to stay in the meat grinder. The theory ends in an insane way. The strategy now is to force her partner's survival instinct by throwing him straight into a lethal situation with no prior warning. The baptism of fire happens under a cold, calculating gaze. Dave's despair turns into focus, and he applies violence as a survival tool. The psychological torture finally pays off. While they stay in this training bubble, their false sense of security hides an imminent danger. The cartel has already tracked their steps and waits in the shadows, ready to cause a bloodbath. Far from there, the facade of Mindy's normal life crumbles. Detective Marcus knows perfectly well that she is lying. He realizes the girl has been bending the rules to keep training Dave in secret. The undeniable proof appears. Mindy's instincts turn a safe environment into an arsenal of war. It becomes clear that the girl is still a lethal machine living under the roof of an ordinary family. Marcus gives the final ultimatum. Mindy needs to cut all ties with the superhero world. The detective triggers her real weak point, the panic that this secret will destroy her mother's sanity. Cornered, she gives in. For the first time, Mindy decides to genuinely let go of her lethal identity. It's the necessary sacrifice to protect the little peace she has found in her new home. Without his mentor, Dave realizes the domino effect of his actions. His irresponsible attitude has inspired a lunatic escalation on the streets. He gave the perfect excuse for other people to dress up like him. Dave's civilian life goes back to being a total void. Without the suit, he faces how invisible and pathetic his high school routine is. Rejection is the only constant, proving that abandoning the costume cured nothing. Temptation speaks louder and he gives in to the addiction. Ignoring the lethal risks, Dave makes the decision to break his promise. He puts on the suit, needing that alter ego to feel alive again. Back on the streets, the impact of his actions becomes evident. He crosses paths with another masked vigilante who bought into the exact same illusion. A bizarre subculture has truly been born. But that vigilante's facade quickly crumbles. The fake gear makes it clear that he's just an ordinary guy risking his life with adapted homemade trash. It's all just a dangerous act. Even so, the spark turns into a wildfire in the boy's head. The idea of creating a real league of heroes blinds him to all the dangers he's already witnessed. He dives headfirst into the teenage fantasy. The chat is interrupted by a real street intimidation. Dave is no longer the cowardly kid from the start of his journey. With his traumatic baggage, he takes charge of the situation without hesitation. A dry thud seals the confrontation. By taking down the threat with merciless force, Dave fully embraces the chaos. He accepts that violence has become the only language he truly masters. The most disturbing part is that Dave realizes he is enjoying this. While his new ally goes into shock at the level of violence, Dave's ego inflates rapidly. However, the illusion of power shatters instantly. Reality hits the duo hard when the unnecessary brutality draws too much attention. They put a giant target on their own backs by messing with the wrong people. Panic takes over. Without a coordinated escape plan, their only way out is to run in desperation through the urban chaos. They desperately try to lose their hunters. When the dust settles, the loneliness is crushing. Lacking true mentorship, Dave desperately tries to reconnect. He begs Mindy to abandon her exile, but the chasm between them is now uncrossable. Mindy is trapped in a purgatory of suburban normality. Her duty to protect her new family forces her to reject him completely. Rejected and on his own again, Dave swallows his pride. He sneaks into the night to try and find the supposed new team his ally had promised. The meeting point reveals a surprising hidden passage. Instead of masked guys in an alley, he finds a level of clandestine organization that shatters all his expectations. The hideout is camouflaged behind the logistics of a local business. As Dave walks through the industrial corridors, his insecurities vanish. He has finally found the stability of a real base of operations. The emotional impact is absolute. That is not an improvised trio, but an entire coalition of costumed misfits. Dave realizes he has inspired a true underground army, validating his entire purpose. The faction's leadership officially welcomes Dave into their ranks. It's not a fan club, but a structured militia. Without realizing it, he signs up for something infinitely more dangerous than his solo crusade. The city's routine hides imminent danger. A man entrusts a responsibility far too great into the hands of a child, completely ignoring the risks of the streets. Reality takes its toll. The worst-case scenario materializes quickly and silently, leaving behind only the evidence of a disturbing failure. Far from there, Dave's new military life takes shape. He finds himself integrated into an underground faction, surrounded by individuals marked by the scars of their past. But the members' stories begin to escalate into the absurd. Their accounts enter the territory of pure sadism, revealing the level of mental instability of these new allies. The group's illusion is shattered when Dave puts the pieces together. He confronts the true identity of one of the members, ignoring any of the militia's rules of secrecy. The farce becomes clear to everyone. The rookie isn't a survivor seeking justice, but just someone desperate for attention, making up bizarre stories to fit in. With the coast clear, Marty confesses his insecurity about joining the team. He fears the leaders will reject him for not being tough enough for the job. But the colonel quickly shuts down that paranoia. He makes it clear that the only real prerequisite for being there is a genuine desire to protect the neighborhood, leaving no room for egos or a violent past. For Dave, this is the absolute pinnacle of everything he fought to build. The dream of gathering a bunch of misfits with the purpose of doing good in the real world has finally come true. All this adrenaline spills over into his daytime life. Dave becomes addicted to the sense of power, walking through the high school hallways knowing the huge vigilante secret he carries. Until he connects the dots of a dark shift at school, Dave realizes that his enemy's online campaign is working, recruiting teenagers and forming new henchmen. But Dave makes a fatal error in judgment. Blinded by his own confidence, he acts with arrogance and underestimates the threat, treating this rival army as a harmless gang. Meanwhile, the deadliest girl in the city faces her own hell. Mindy is in total apathy, forced to endure a high school routine that goes against everything she was trained to be. The weight of her reality is crushing. Her entire life's purpose and legacy have been stripped away by strict prohibitions, severing the only channel of connection to her true nature. The price of the double life also takes its toll on Dave at home. Seeing his son constantly exhausted and bruised, his father reaches the breaking point of his concern and asks directly if the boy is on drugs. The father clings to his son's denial as a lifeline. This blind vote of confidence is exactly what crushes the boy's mind under the weight of guilt and lies. Back on the streets, the team leader's past comes to light. A radical religious epiphany was the trigger for former mobsters to trade organized crime for this crusade. The moment of truth arrives, and there's no more room for hesitation. The entire team mobilizes together, ready to put all their tactical planning into practice on the streets. The target of the raid reveals a disgusting reality. It's a brutal exploitation ring, which eliminates any moral dilemma about the ruthless attack the group is about to carry out. Instead of an explosive entrance, the choice is psychological terror. The leader's approach is delivered with a terrifying cordiality, completely destabilizing the local guards. Soon, the facade crumbles and gives way to the veterans' lethal brutality. The furious attack leaves no room for reaction, unleashing absolute chaos in the criminal stronghold. The heroic illusion ends right here. The attack turns into a pure massacre, forcing the rookies to swallow the harsh reality that there are no rules in this shadow war. The inexperienced vigilante's hesitation is devoured by adrenaline. The initial fear of taking a life gives way to the survival instinct and the dark fury of real physical combat. Tactical dominance is fully consolidated. With the resistance forcibly crushed, the masked vigilantes assume absolute control of the environment, validating their ruthless methods. To completely break the minds of the subdued criminals, a beast is brought into play. Panic reaches unbearable levels in the face of the animal's pure predatory instinct, and the lethal threat is fulfilled in the most visceral way possible. The physical punishment turns into the ultimate warning that the new owners of the city aren't here to play. With the boss completely broken by panic and overcome by agony, the preparation comes to an end. Mental resistance has been decimated, finally paving the way for the real interrogation to begin. The raid on the supposed restaurant kicks off by kicking the door down. The militia isn't after money. They came to deliver a clear and brutal message to all the parasites operating in the neighborhood. Under immense pain, the criminal breaks and confesses where he's keeping the victims hidden. In a desperate attempt, he warns them that an innocent family member is upstairs. Upstairs, Dave focuses on the mission's true objective. He finally locates the victims the ring had been keeping locked up and sedated. When the situation spirals out of control, Dave rides the adrenaline and makes sure his obstacles stay down, giving way to pure survival instinct. In one fell swoop, the militia uses the dirty money seized from the criminals to fund those women's freedom and fresh start. Meanwhile, on the main floor, the colonel delivers a merciless beating to the drug boss. It's a message designed never to be forgotten. Leaving the bloodbath behind, Dave's reaction is chilling. The brutal success of that night leaves him intoxicated and addicted to his crusade. Later, the Colonel breaks the tension with a simple revelation. He explains that their true weapon isn't gunpowder, but rather psychological warfare against the underworld. Over time, the movement explodes. Their constant presence inspires everyday citizens to get off the couch and invent their own vigilante personas. In a matter of weeks, Justice Forever ceases to be an improvised little club. They become a formidable urban militia, cheered on by the public. Riding this wave of victory, Dave decides he can't leave his best friend out. He recruits Todd into the revolution. But beneath all the fun and games, Dave knows they're just vulnerable amateurs. He desperately tries to convince the lethal Mindy to come out of retirement. Mindy pours cold water on his hopes. She reveals that going back to that bloody world would be a death sentence for her new family. Mindy's legal guardian steps in and cuts the conversation short. He makes it clear that Dave is a threat, and the kid realizes the team is on its own. Arriving at his own building, Dave's instincts go off. An inconsistency in his apartment setup gives him a chilling sense of a privacy invasion. His absolute worst nightmare comes true. The secret identity he took so many beatings to protect crumbles at the hands of his own father. In his father's mind, the truth is downright terrifying. He thinks his son has crossed the line of sanity and joined some sick cult. But instead of backing down or feeling ashamed, Dave takes control of the narrative. He defends the legacy he's built without an ounce of remorse. The argument severs their family ties for good. Now homeless, Dave runs away and turns the Justice Forever headquarters into his only safe haven. Inside, the Colonel fully embraces the role of a father figure and leader. He focuses his efforts on turning that bunch of enthusiastic amateurs into a legitimate institution. But their fantasy of invulnerability is shattered in the cruelest way possible. The relentless brutality of the real world walks right through the sanctuary's doors. Organized crime's retaliation has arrived. The amateur team finds themselves face to face with a professional and lethal hit squad. The skill gap is an absolute abyss. Before they can even react, the leadership of Justice Forever is neutralized without a chance to defend themselves. The true architect of the attack takes center stage. The revenge-driven rich kid declares that the era of playing cops and robbers is over. The scale of his investment becomes clear. His fortune has bought the world's elite of violence, proving that the Colonel was nothing more than a trivial warm-up. Trashing the base, the villain forces the Colonel to watch the demolition of everything he loved in his final moments. Without a shred of honor, the final execution takes place. The founder of Justice Forever is put down like a nuisance on the floor of the very place he swore to protect. To kick off his new reign of terror, the rich kid decides to adopt a supervillain name, a choice based purely on sadism, meant to offend the entire city. Hours later, when the police raid the basement, the atmosphere is heavy. The brutality of what they find goes way beyond any ordinary gang violence. The militia leader has been turned into a macabre trophy. The killer made sure to humiliate him, leaving behind a blatant declaration of war. News of the massacre leaks and hits the national media. The alert spreads, confirming the worst fears of those who know the real risks. Witnessing the tragic aftermath, anger replaces Mindy's hesitation. It becomes clear that turning her back is no longer an option. Her retirement is officially over. Mindy tries to fit into the civilian life Marcus has forced upon her. She goes through the motions of a normal child, but her mind is clearly elsewhere. Trying to interact with kids her own age is an absolute disaster. Her military-style upbringing fractured the girl's psyche, preventing her from forming genuine connections in the civilian world. That is, until her bubble of normalcy bursts with news of the massacre at the Justice Forever HQ. She gets the message immediately. The enemy has returned, and the carnage is now personal. Her old instincts resurface, but Marcus panics and shuts her down harshly. He leverages his unquestionable authority as her adoptive father to block any thoughts of revenge. She throws reality in his face, knowing full well that Dave and his team are just a bunch of amateurs. Against professional killers, they stand absolutely no chance of surviving without her. Ultimately, the girl swallows her anger and yields. The isolation becomes suffocating, and the promise of safety turns into a psychological cage that keeps her from fighting. Meanwhile, what remains of Justice Forever tries to pick up the pieces. Without a safe house, they are left completely exposed, dealing with shattered morale and constant vulnerability. Desperation tears the team apart. Half of them are consumed by a thirst for revenge, considering an all-out gang war to wash their honor in blood. Dave grasps the true gravity of the warning. That brutal massacre was just the opening of hunting season, and he concludes that everyone present is marked for death. On the flip side, Chris decides against going straight after Kick-Ass. He He wants to break the hero psychologically, exacting a toll through the person he loves most. The gang arrives in the suburbs with orders to wreak havoc across the neighborhood. The goal is to draw away any distractions, ensuring he has absolute privacy for his revenge. The false sense of security at home crumbles in seconds as the door is kicked in. Katie's family is caught off guard, and her parents' protective instincts instantly kick in against the threat. She tries to run, but it's useless. Because of the lies Dave told to protect his secret identity, Katie ends up being punished for a crime she doesn't even know he committed. The torture turns physical. Every blow is a message designed to break the hero's spirit. She is reduced to a tragic messenger, bearing the brunt of an amateur's mistakes. The police finally arrive in the suburbs to try and contain the savagery. Chris's gang realizes the situation has now escalated into an official state response, but the former elite operative hired as a bodyguard couldn't care less about the sirens. She views the entire police force as nothing more than a light warm-up. Her movement across the battlefield is relentlessly aggressive as she actively hunts down the officers. She turns their own barricades into death traps and completely shreds the police's numerical advantage. There is absolutely no room for heroism or fighting back. The sheer speed of the carnage highlights the massive tactical gap between a local patrol and a relentless killing machine. The initial squad is mercilessly wiped out. With the authorities decimated in the streets, the message is clear. The villains can now overpower the forces of the state. Chris takes in the terrifying impact of his living weapon. The mercenary brings the lethal coldness of someone who has operated at the highest echelons of the international military. With a force of nature of that caliber on their side, all hesitation completely vanishes. The group's confidence shifts into pure arrogance as they anticipate the coming bloodbath. The government's passivity runs out. The system responds with a ruthless tactical operation, utilizing cyber tracking to hunt down every single masked individual all at once. Pressured by public hysteria, the tactical forces drop any cautious approaches. They resort to institutionalized brutality against all the amateurs out on the streets. Any attempt to reason with them is useless. The system has already decided that vigilantes are the root of the problem, summarily revoking any right to a defense. Away from the streets, the secret truth is exposed. Confronting his own son's double life brings agonizing pain to Dave's father, laying bare the grim sentence that has just swallowed their family. Guilt crushes Dave as he visits Katie in the hospital. He realizes the attack wasn't random. The enemy knows his true identity, and innocents are paying the price. He connects the dots of the tragedy. The violence against her was an interrogation, targeting his weakest link to extract crucial information about him. The target is drastically shifted, and the revenge was never going to stop with her. Absolute panic washes over Dave as he realizes the planned extermination is aimed at his own family. He drops everything, ignoring his friend's confusion at the hospital. The sense of urgency swallows any need for explanation in a frantic race to save his father's life. But upon arriving home, the scene is bizarre. The forces of the state have taken over. To protect his son from martial law, his father has claimed the superhero identity and the criminal weight that comes with it. Watching his father's life be destroyed causes a paralyzing shock. Dave runs straight into the disaster, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the sacrifice made in his name. The older man accepts his fate in the back seat. He bears the government's humiliating retaliation entirely on his own, just to ensure his son can keep living as a free man. In a moment of pure agony, the boy tries to expose the truth, but a simple exchange of glances seals a pact. His father's silence demands that the son accept the sacrifice. The feeling of powerlessness is absolute. Physically restrained, he watches passively as his pillar of safety is destroyed, knowing he lost his family simply because he decided to play vigilante. Dave visits the maximum security prison. He has to face the sacrifice made by his father, who took the fall for his secret identity and was imprisoned in his place. But his father refuses to back down. Relying on a legal loophole, he believes the system will be forced to release him within days and thinks he has everything under control. The condition for this sacrifice is clear. His father demands that Dave abandon the vigilante life for good and stay out of the war on the streets. Completely crushed by guilt and lacking the strength to fight, the boy gives in. He gives his word that he will hang up his mask for good. Meanwhile, far away, Chris burns through absurd amounts of money to build his own criminal empire. He's completely obsessed with creating a megalomaniacal supervillain aesthetic, but the old mob doesn't like the mess. Chris. The traditional crime bosses call to warn him that Chris's scandalous killing spree is drawing police attention and hurting business. Rejecting the old mob, Chris focuses on revenge. Since the son is in hiding and out of reach, he decides to go after a much easier target who has nowhere to run. At the maximum security prison, the promise of solitary confinement crumbles. His gut feeling was right, and the street war crosses behind bars, bringing a very real danger. In his hideout, Dave is taken by surprise. A simple digital notification turns his peaceful environment into the worst nightmare imaginable. The message is absolutely cruel. The prison system failed, and Dave's father was brutally executed in a sick display of power by his enemy. And just to twist the knife, his enemy leaks the Vigilante's secret identity to the entire world. The tragedy loses all its privacy, and there's nowhere left to run. The funeral brings the ultimate reality check. Dave realizes that his superhero fantasy cost the life of the only guy who truly mattered. His spirit completely broken, the boy makes a decision. He decides to give up on revenge and just wants to disappear, hiding far away from all the chaos. He confesses his fears to Mindy, terrified she would hate him for failing, but her response lifts a massive weight off his shoulders, showing zero resentment and a total understanding of his pain. But the mourning is abruptly cut short. A coordinated and cowardly ambush strikes the funeral, proving this war respects no moral boundaries. The devastation destroys the sanctuary of his farewell. Dave's attempt to escape the violence is vaporized amidst the explosions, making it clear that the carnage is only just beginning. Amidst the chaos, the true intention behind the attack is revealed. The goal was never just to massacre the guests, but to capture Dave directly. With the authorities neutralized, the extraction is a success. The boy is dragged mercilessly into the enemy faction's transport. The getaway speeds through the streets with maximum brutality. The abduction is secured, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake, cutting off any chance of an immediate rescue. Once inside the vehicle, the enemy squad begins the psychological torture. They make sure to let Dave know that the chaos at the cemetery was just a warm-up. Chris's obsession goes beyond physical pain. The kidnappers show him his old suit, forcing him to don the mantle once again in order to completely humiliate the symbol Dave swore to abandon. But fate changes in the blink of an eye. A sudden lethal strike surgically obliterates the kidnappers' absolute advantage. It finally dawns on the enemy squad. They realize a lethal threat is piercing through the roof of the van, but the realization comes too late. The henchmen are ruthlessly executed inside the vehicle. The grand spectacle of torture is dismantled in an instant, saving Dave. From the wreckage of the transport, his savior reveals herself. Mindy took the offensive all by herself, tearing the van apart and snatching her partner from the jaws of death. The forced retirement ends right then and there. Mindy decrees that running away is no longer an option, stepping up to the front lines and declaring all-out war against Chris's empire. The pursuit reaches an insane level. The goons desperately try to lose the threat, but soon realize fleeing is not an option. The huntress has already taken absolute control of the situation, and that's when the slaughter truly begins. Without warning, the invasion turns into a bloodbath. Dave is forced to swallow his shock and watch from the front row. The savior's ruthless brutality spares no one. The tactic now is to cut the problem off at its root. Subduing the convoy's leadership means taking the reins of the operation. It's the only way to dictate the course of this war. The price for choosing the wrong side is paid right there on the asphalt. A banal and definitive end seals the mercenaries' fate. It serves as a clear reminder that the margin of error in the mob is zero. With the threat contained, the strategy shifts to intel extraction. The only way to cut the evil at its root is by discovering the ultimate goal of this whole operation. The promise of life becomes the only bargaining chip. In the middle of this rolling graveyard, the rescued prisoner regains consciousness. Waking up surrounded by the aftermath of his own salvation brings a harsh reality check. Dave quickly realizes he has lost track of who is actually in charge. It's time for the ultimate call to action. The leadership's demand is harsh and direct. He needs to bury his grief, shoulder the responsibility of a hero, and mentally prepare himself to wipe out the source of this nightmare. They head straight for the hunt's final destination. What was once an untouchable fortress for the criminal elite now becomes ground zero for a disaster. Payback has just arrived at the front door. The invasion kicks off in the most brutal way possible. The assault violently shatters the illusion that the mob base was impenetrable. The long-awaited counterattack has just knocked on their door. Reality hits the mercenaries hard and without mercy. The shock is immediate when they realize the prey has become the predator. They quickly discover they are completely unprepared for this level of threat. While chaos runs rampant all around, Dave channels all his grief and fury into an initial strike. He needs to break the Giants' morale right off the bat. It's the only way to even the odds and show he won't back down until the emotional breaking point is reached. The excruciating pain of his family's loss finally boils over. What was supposed to be a tactical breach turns into a blind and desperate lynching for justice. The score is settled. Physically drained and with a heavy soul, Dave observes the macabre aftermath of his fury. He cements the fact that he has crossed a point of no return, losing his innocence. Amidst the destruction of the lair, luck smiles upon the duo. They find exactly what they needed, a potential informant who didn't have the luxury of dying in the initial assault. The casualness with which the torture method is chosen exposes the moral abyss. While the girl operates as an unfiltered extraction machine, the boy watches. It's yet another reality check regarding the dirty side of this war. The torture yields the expected result. The exact location and time of a massive terrorist attack are ripped from the prisoner. Now begins a desperate race against the clock to prevent the tragedy. The threat demands extreme measures and police involvement. She makes any return to safety conditional on the total annihilation of the enemy faction. While she imposes her rules, her partner works in the digital background to gain a tactical advantage. The tide turns with an audacious online plan. The appeal to amateur heroes isn't out of altruism, but a golden opportunity. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance for this community to live out their fantasy of fighting evil in real life. The imposed mental strategy works. He swallows his anguish and buries what was left of his naivety for good. Self-pity gives way to a cold and absolute acceptance of the carnage that must be done. Meanwhile, the cartel's leadership demonstrates its cruelty. The order is to use a location intimately connected to Dave's personal life as the trigger for it all. It's a message that they will unleash absolute hell, and the execution of the terrorist plan is devastating. The criminal network coordinates simultaneous surgical strikes across the metropolis. The urban landscape transforms into a literal war zone in a matter of seconds. That's when the villain's true intention materializes. Believing they were misled, the police command takes the bait. They make the fatal decision to abandon the city's primary security perimeter. With no containment barriers at the actual target, the invasion turns into an overwhelming massacre. The defenseless crowd in the front line are swallowed by a relentless force. The nightmare takes over the heart of the city. People are cornered and slaughtered in cold blood before they even grasp the severity of the attack. The level of public brutality is surreal. Absolute panic dominates every invaded street. The fragile line of defense crumbles right away. The few officers trying to maintain order are quickly crushed by the mercenaries' brutal superiority. Civilians are left completely defenseless in the crossfire. But at the height of the slaughter, something breaks the momentum of the attack. The leader of the criminal army suddenly hears his given name echo through the street. This forces his attention away from the ongoing carnage. Dave and his partner finally enter the battlefield. They take the front line of an almost impossible scenario. They fully accept the burden of trying to stop that death machine on their own. The villain makes a point of rubbing his overwhelming tactical advantage in the heroes' faces. He makes it clear that rescue is an illusion and the system failed on purpose. The math of that confrontation would guarantee nothing but the duo's total annihilation. But the criminal intimidation has no effect. The response comes with the calculating coldness of someone who didn't walk blindly into their grave. They reveal that the true contingency plan was merely waiting. The work in the shadows reveals itself in the form of a literal civilian army. The network of vigilantes and online allies answered the emergency call in full force. These are ordinary people willing to take back control of their own streets at any cost. The psychological game flips in the blink of an eye, and the clash erupts. With the playing field leveled, the resistance declares the start of the ultimate retaliation. The massacre turns into the greatest urban warfare ever witnessed there. The dust begins to settle at the epicenter of the clash. Dave finally comes face to face with the architect of that entire bloodbath. All his hesitation and fear are completely gone. It's the point of no return in the war. Dave and his partner establish a posture of absolute dominance, without yielding a single inch to the cartel. They are there solely to collect the debt with pure violence. The architect tries to flip the psychological script right from the start. He attacks his opponent's stance, attempting to use Dave's hypocrisy to shatter his confidence. The provocation works perfectly. Rationality goes out out the window, pride takes the wheel, and diplomacy gives way to an explosion of impulsivity from both sides. The point of no return is finally crossed, hesitation dies, and the conflict officially escalates to the brink of absolute violence. All hell breaks loose, swallowing the entire block. The urban civil war reaches its peak, clashing militia and terrorists in a brutal meat grinder. Amidst the carnage, Dave's partner isolates the true threat. She realizes the group's survival depends on neutralizing the enemy's main military force, but the reality check is crushing. The retaliation completely breaks the offensive, proving that a single miscalculation can be lethal against this adversary. The death warrant seems signed. The mercenary nullifies the girl's main advantage, snuffing out her hopes and leaving her completely exposed. Physical punishment follows the psychological attack. The girl is treated like a complete amateur, feeling the brutal difference in combat experience firsthand. But the mercenary makes her first mistake out of pure arrogance. She confesses that it's all just a well-paid job, underestimating the emotional weight of the fight for the girl. It's exactly at this moment of peak tension that Battle Guy stumbles right into the center of the problem. His accidental and clumsy intrusion becomes the unexpected variable. The reaction is lethal and immediate. Seizing the distraction, the girl channels all her fury into a single devastating counterattack against her tormentor. The outcome is absolute and irreversible. The retaliation puts a definitive end to the threat that nearly cost them everything. Exhausted and pushed to the limit after her victory, she makes the most rational decision. The girl orders an immediate retreat before the urban chaos swallows them whole. Meanwhile, Dave focuses entirely on the rival leader amidst the madness. He ignores the rest of the conflict, determined to prevent any chance of escape. For Dave, this is the culmination of months of trauma. He finally has the man responsible for destroying his family completely dominated and at his mercy. The retaliation finally begins in a relentless manner. All the frustration and pain accumulated over the months are unleashed upon his adversary. But then comes the moral test, and Dave draws a clear line. He refuses to execute his enemy, deciding to let the system deal with the villain. The system's response, however, is blind and ruthless. The police crackdown arrives, crushing the conflict and treating everyone as criminals in the blink of an eye. Taking advantage of this institutional chaos, the villain sees the perfect opening. He abandons all loyalty and flees during the police intervention. Dave refuses to let him get away with it. Even at the brink of exhaustion, he dives into a solitary pursuit of the villain. The chase reaches its limit. Dave moves in, marking the definitive moment of reckoning with nowhere left for the target to run. But the rival's cowardly strategy works. A sudden shock completely disorients Dave, turning his confidence to dust in a matter of seconds. Dave is past the point of listening to reason. He refuses any chance of a truce, reacting brutally to silence his opponent. Regaining absolute control of the situation, Dave declares at the end of the line. His intention solidifies, to ensure the enemy rots in jail. However, one last trap is sprung. Cowardice shatters Dave's tactical superiority, leaving the hero in absolute despair once again. That's when Dave hits his psychological breaking point. Driven purely by rage, he decides the only acceptable solution is definitive extermination. The violence of the impact dictates the definitive end. There is no going back, no starting over, only the brutality of the final blow. Unable to sustain his alter ego, the cruel truth forces itself upon Dave. With the authorities closing in, he realizes he has crossed the line separating vigilantes from murderers. Reality crashes down, and he faces the destruction he caused. The sense of victory evaporates under the crushing weight of his mistake, until he notices the rival is still holding on. The rival leader is now nothing more than a scared kid swearing total submission. Hearing his enemy beg for his life confirms that he has butchered an insecure youth. In a desperate moment to avoid becoming a cold-blooded killer, Dave throws tactics out the window. He makes a risky decision to try and fix the damage. He calls for rescue, and the state intervention arrives in full force. The scene of destruction is immediately locked down by the authorities. Dave's salvation arrives aggressively. The girl resurfaces and takes control of the situation, fixing her partner's amateurish mistakes. She goes on the offensive with a bold maneuver. A tactical distraction is initiated to open the escape window that Dave desperately needs. She draws all the state's attention to herself. By becoming public enemy number one, the girl ensures that Dave's path remains completely clear. Survival instinct takes over, and she forces her own way out. Stopping is not an option with the police trying to eliminate her. Her strategy proves genius at first. The logistical collapse of the security system ends up working in favor of her escape. But the lead detective decides to go rogue. Frustrated, he abandons rationality and tries to solve the problem personally. He puts himself on a collision course in a suicidal bluff. The cop forces the girl to make an impossible moral decision in a split second. Time runs out. At the very last second, hero ethics overcome the instinct of self-preservation, and she chooses to swerve to avoid killing the cop. The suicidal escape takes its toll. The maneuver saves the detective's life but seals her fate as she is finally restrained by state forces. Far away, Dave and the rest of the group carry the suffocating weight of the night. The terror of an imminent interception turns their escape into a nightmare. The overwhelming pressure of the siege forces the worst possible decision. The desperation for freedom speaks louder, and they keep moving forward, leaving their partner behind. Meanwhile, consecration happens on the streets. The public rejects legal protocol and crowns the Vigilantes as true heroes. The voice of the people focuses its fanaticism on her. Captured, the girl receives moral amnesty from the crowd and is crowned the ultimate symbol of resistance. Amidst the apprehension, shock hits the one who least expected it. Officer Marcus breaches the blockade and realizes that the target of the manhunt is his own stepdaughter. With no way out, the stepfather confesses their relationship in front of the entire squad. He begs for an ounce of empathy to save the girl. The state's retaliation is immediate. An arrest warrant for conspiracy falls upon Marcus, swallowing up the only guardian she had left. Faced with her stepfather's ruin, her vulnerability shows. She takes the blame for destroying her own family, feeling the true cost of her sacrifice. But the state does not break her spirit. Displayed as a trophy by the police, she embraces the myth and turns her capture into the ultimate ideological victory. Mindy knew this day might come. Anticipating her arrest, she left clear instructions, passing her entire legacy down to Dave. To ensure he could get her out, she left him a multi-million-dollar fund, a complete arsenal, and mapped out routes for federal prisons. The orders for Dave are clear. Drop off the radar, study the guard's routine, and focus on a surgical rescue. Despite the team's initial dread regarding the mission, Dave takes the lead. Driven by gratitude, he knows that abandoning the girl would be an unforgivable betrayal. Weeks go by, grief gives way to focus, and the group finally gathers at the agreed time to try their luck. The mission to free the community's greatest symbol becomes a matter of honor, and the team seems fully engaged under his leadership. The strategy isn't brute force, but intelligence. Using the cloned access provided by Mindy, they plan to silently bypass the maximum security. But when they face the target, reality crushes their confidence. The sheer scale of the challenge begins to crack the group's conviction. Panic creates a domino effect. Their survival instinct kicks in, and the harsh truth that they are just amateurs hits the team head on. Hesitation quickly takes its toll, and the silent rescue plan goes out the window in the blink of an eye with a clumsy break-in. As the self-proclaimed rescue squad flees desperately to save their own skins, the only person who matters remains in her cell, alone and hopeless. Once safe, the group comes up with the perfect excuse. They tell themselves they didn't run out of fear, but made a tactical retreat to focus on more training. 6 months pass, and while the team keeps dodging their responsibilities, the prisoner suffers the harsh consequences of being abandoned. Dave completely disconnects from reality. He turns his own guilt into the aesthetic of a tormented hero, focusing on posing for pictures instead of taking action. But adult life catches up to him. Without the delusion to sustain him full-time, he is forced to swallow his pride in a dead-end job just to pay rent. To escape this failed civilian life, he puts on the mask again. His alter ego stops being a hobby and becomes his only lifeline to keep from going crazy. Desperate to prove he's still relevant, he drags his partner into picking a fight with a smaller target just to inflate his own ego. They arrive at the location and cut the power, betting everything on a classic intimidation tactic using the fear of the dark. But the reality check comes fast in the form of a lecture. No one is scared, just annoyed because the little lights out trick messed up the cash register system. The tactic ends up working for the most humiliating reason possible. The informant gives up the address just to quickly get rid of those costumed idiots. With the intel in hand, Dave thinks he commanded respect and makes his exit stumbling in the dark, leaving behind only completely fed-up civilians. With the new target's address set, he ignores stealth. Chasing that action movie thrill, he chooses a tactical approach driven purely by ego. With no room to back down and ignoring his partner's hesitation in the rear, Dave launches into the breach, blindly trusting the element of surprise. But the fantasy evaporates upon impact. The breach turns into a complete tactical disaster, resulting in pure humiliation, pain, and disorientation. operation. To add to the frustration and embarrassment, they discover that the supposedly dangerous target was already incapacitated by his own incompetence, posing no threat whatsoever. Trying to save their egos somehow, they leave a mark for the cops, but the effort falls apart due to a basic spelling mistake that turns them into a joke. Stripped of the prestige of an epic rescue, they abandon the frustrating scene in an anticlimactic way, anonymously outsourcing the wrap-up. Upon returning to the secret base, the decay of the operation becomes evident. The group's discipline is gone, giving way to absolute complacency in the sanctuary. The disrespect is shocking. Not only has the team taken over the hideout built on Mindy's sacrifice, but they are also using her arsenal for petty pranks. The audacity is such that civilians are brought into the core of operations, and their survival fund is being blown on cheap entertainment. Shattering this illusion, Dave loses his temper and lays down a heavy ultimatum. Either the group gets back to real street missions, or the cowards are out. But the threat falls on deaf ears. The group's response is absolute mockery, treating Dave's leadership outburst as just a passing nuisance. Unable to stand the mediocrity and existential emptiness of that environment, Dave shuts down the argument, preferring the lethal risk of a solitary night hunt. Completely discarding his normal life, he dives headfirst into the delusion. The adrenaline of danger is now his only oxygen to keep functioning. He walks through the darkness of hostile territory, actively seeking violence, wanting to prove to himself that his vigilante crusade still matters. But a trivial domestic thought distracts him and takes its toll instantly. With his guard completely down, the danger he was looking for finds him first. The heroic illusion evaporates in crushing fashion. Reality hits him head-on as he realizes he walked with his eyes closed straight into a firing squad. Dave's solo patrol starts off in the worst way possible. He thought he was stopping a crime, but quickly realizes he walked straight into an ambush. Even terrified, his survival instincts kick in. He makes the desperate decision to fight back, risking his own life to avoid going down without a fight. But the streets have no rules. A dirty, devastating blow shatters whatever heroic illusions he still held onto, ending his resistance in seconds. Defeated, the humiliation reaches its peak. The attackers decide to take absolutely everything, cementing the complete failure of this first patrol, until an unexpected variable enters the equation. A random bystander witnesses the end of the beatdown, scaring the attackers away. The stranger, who introduces herself as a nurse, insists on getting him off the streets. With no other options and a shattered ego, Dave gives in and accepts her help. In the car, he keeps spinning lies to save his heroic facade. Dave makes up a story about needing to protect his identity due to some intense stuff from his past, and the effort pays off. The nurse Valerie makes it clear that it was an honor to meet a real superhero, validating his ego. While he strokes his own ego, the story shifts back to reality. Angie Genovese's life has become a living hell, bearing the burden of being a psychopath's mother. There's no escape on the streets. A woman confronts Angie just to throw her son's crimes and murders right in her face. The guilt by association follows her all the way to prison. There, the Mafia's old guard announces that the new boss, Rocco, has rigged the system to get her son released. Rocco makes a point of showing he owns everything. He barks sadistic orders at a rookie cop, proving that the police force has become the Mafia's personal plaything. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the kid who caused this whole nightmare won't stop whining. Chris is terrified of what his Mafia-backed release might unleash. His mother's patience evaporates. Angie throws the harsh truth in her son's face, refusing to carry the blame for his choices and his twisted sense of fun. Now in a leadership role, Kick-Ass gathers his team to try and organize a counterattack. The challenge is that the rest of the group has no idea what they're up against. He explains the gravity of the situation. Mob boss Rocco's plan is to build the largest criminal empire in the country by executing anyone who stands in his way. To counter the threat, Dave suggests crashing the Genovese family party using intimidation tactics straight out of comic books. But the fear of a direct confrontation terrifies the rest of them. Part of the team backs down, believing that taking on the Mafia is suicide, and they suggest sticking only to virtual threats. The insubordination is clear, and Dave's speech falls flat. The alliance crumbles at the first sign of lethal danger, with the group abandoning the mission. Knowing that things have spiraled out of control and the heroes have backed down, Angie takes matters into her own hands. She arms herself, determined to ensure her son's safety on her own. Far away, Chris vents to the hospital's janitor. Filled with regret, he admits that his criminal crusade was nothing more than a spoiled rich kid's game, but his confession invites death. The supposed janitor pulls the thread of a bloody past, revealing that the hospital's safe haven has become a lethal trap. The methodical execution begins in silence. Being suffocated, Chris faces his final seconds, about to pay a brutal price for his family's debts. Outside, Rocco's corruption is laid bare by the bought-off guards, but Angie catches them off guard, subduing the security detail that was enabling the hit. She bursts into the room at the exact moment the hitman is mocking Chris. The tables are turned, and the predator suddenly finds himself as the prey. Driven by desperation, Angie unloads all her fury without hesitation. The mercenary's immediate execution sends a violent message to the rest of the mob. The ensuing silence reveals their new reality. Chris survived, but now mother and son, surrounded by carnage, know that this bloody underworld nightmare has only just begun. The prison thinks it can fix Mindy. The system sends a new psychiatrist to solitary confinement, naively believing she's just another troubled youth to be rehabilitated. But Hit Girl doesn't need firearms to be lethal. Anyone who gets in her way in there is brutally eliminated, proving the prison system cannot contain her. The truth is that this maximum security facility is just a base of operations. She has already subjugated the prison gangs and established a ruthless dictatorship, turning hell into a private office. She has built a real empire. The country's most dangerous inmates now offer luxury gifts and contraband to a teenager just to keep breathing. But for her, it's just a pastime. She isn't really locked up in there. She's merely killing time until the exact moment to end the charade and go back to painting the streets red. Meanwhile, on the streets of New York, Dave sinks deeper into his own charade. He blends his vigilante and love lives, exposing his secret identity in the city to keep up the lie for his girlfriend. Cornered by her questions, he finally confesses his biggest insecurity. Dave admits the mask is a crutch for his ego, and that without the disguise, he sees himself as a total nobody. But the girl crushes this self-sabotage. She states with impeccable logic that his courage to go out and take a beating for others completely negates any personal failure on his part. Disarmed by this absolute vote of confidence, Dave makes a risky decision. Breaking the biggest rule of masked heroes, he trusts her with his true identity in a blind leap of faith. Far from there, the criminal underworld celebrates a long-awaited return. The Mafia's old guard decides to embrace the heir of the fallen empire, pouring rivers of money into the organization. But the financial backing is actually a leash in disguise. The bosses make it clear they will fund the kid's revenge, as long as he behaves like their property. They couldn't care less about his pain. The real intention behind their support is to use the momentum to unify the East Coast criminal empire, sweeping away obstacles with zero patience. Across town, Dave's team finally reaches the target of their big mission. Using heavy breach tactics, they act like a true paramilitary unit. All this unbridled firepower comes directly from Mindy's secret arsenal. Dave decides to take on his allies' lethal legacy, using the tools of a true killing machine. Even armed to the teeth, the team's mentality is still childish. Dave focuses on rehearsing his victory speech, completely ignoring that the enemies on the other side shoot to kill. His rigid moral compass takes its toll. Dave pauses the high-risk invasion to fulfill a trivial charitable whim, proving he still prioritizes the good guy fantasy. The consequence of this silly delay is an absolute disaster. The cinematic entrance turns to dust, and the heroes end up exposed and cornered by the mob in the most vulnerable situation possible. Dave hits rock bottom as a leader. Panicking and completely overpowered, he is forced to trigger the desperate escape protocol, making the terrible decision to abandon his team. Without a clean escape route, hesitation gives way to adrenaline. Dave goes on an instinctive offensive, breaking through the defensive lines with desperate aggression, but reality is ruthless, and his luck runs out. Overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of organized crime, the heroic moment crumbles in the face of an imminent execution. With death staring him in the face, instinct takes over. Dave risks his own neck and triggers his extreme trump card, proving that his phase of pretend heroism is over for good. The insane gamble works. The detonation creates massive chaos and completely breaks the mobster's formation, creating the window of distraction he needed to escape. Blinded by the panic of being caught, Dave takes the conflict into the public domain. He drags a relentless war right into the middle of the civilian population. Survival now depends on desperate leaps. He pushes his physical limits to the max, forcing a vertical distance that firearms can't cover with precision. However, exhaustion takes its toll, and the inevitable happens. His body simply reaches the human limit, fully collapsing in the middle of the extraction route. With nowhere to run and no strength left to fight, fight, any survival instinct evaporates. Fallen, he accepts defeat and only mentally begs for an impossible miracle. At the height of terror, a sudden and aggressive order cuts through the air. It's a completely insane instruction, but he chooses to blindly trust the only gamble he has left. The irony of fate reveals itself, and the miracle gets a name. Former allies intervene in a surgical maneuver to clean up the mess caused by Dave's inexperience. With the mob ambush left behind, relief finally takes over. He escapes certain death by the narrowest of margins, securing the bitter luxury of dealing with the weight of this disastrous night. The police hunt begins in full force, and the block is cordoned off. The streets become a lethal trap for Dave with no chance of escape, but karma decides to collect a debt. A stranger Dave helped in the past becomes his lifeline. With this improvised help, he escapes the chaos, a survival guaranteed not by skill, but by pure luck and compassion. Meanwhile, the Mafia faces the humiliation of the attack on their base. It becomes clear that the Vigilantes are a real threat to business. Suspicions immediately turn to the release of the criminal heir. The Red Alert demands swift retaliation. In the upper echelons, failures demand sacrifices. The responsibility for the humiliation seals the fate of the one who allowed this blunder. The boss's fury shifts the dynamic of the conflict. Zero tolerance. What was a childish nuisance becomes a lethal matter of honor. Far away, the power vacuum forces a restructuring. The heroic team begins a relentless recruitment drive to clash head-on with the threat. Back at the base, Dave's ego gets the better of him. He survived but suffers from the frustration of not having a legendary moment. The war demands numbers, and the expansion of the resistance goes into full swing, leaving Dave completely sidelined. The harsh truth is rubbed in his face. No one has time to play comic book hero anymore while being hunted in the streets. To make matters worse, the team forges a new symbol of unity, a visual identity that makes it clear just how disposable Dave has become. Driven by a bruised ego, Dave takes the risk of clashing head-on and loses control, creating an imminent risk of an internal massacre. The expulsion is finalized. The team sheds the dead weight, but the humiliation has just planted a seed of hatred that walks out the door. The depressing civilian reality knocks at the door. Dave goes back to square one, dealing with his life in a claustrophobic apartment. The isolation takes its toll. Without the team, he spirals into frustration, seeking control in pointless online arguments. The only thing preventing a mental breakdown is the promise of a real human connection. A scheduled date is his anchor. With Valerie, he finds common ground. For the first time in weeks, Dave can just relax and be a regular guy. She demonstrates a quiet resilience when opening up about her medical condition, a strength that deeply impresses Dave. The outside world ceases to matter. They cross the definitive line, surrendering to a rare moment of peace and normalcy. But the calm stays far away from the criminal underworld. In the Mafia, the Empire's heir is backed into a corner to prove his loyalty by getting his hands dirty. A cruel execution seals the organization's new directive. The official hunt for the city's deadliest vigilante is decreed. The inevitable happens. After causing colossal damage, the Resistance's main force is finally subdued and captured. Even contained in a maximum security prison, Mindy remains a force of nature, demanding absolute vigilance. Cheap intimidation doesn't work. Far from keeping her head down in the cells, she establishes immediate dominance over the criminals. The prison psychiatry plays dirty. The focus shifts to the vigilante's only blind spot, the damage her actions cause to her own family. The mention of her mother ignites an uncontrollable killer instinct. The button to destabilize the heroine has finally been found. On the outside, the corrupt police guards panic. The new Mafia leadership has turned the bribery scheme into a war zone. With their survival instinct pushed to the limit, the decision is made. Cut ties and bail out before they become a statistic. To fund their exile, they decide to bite the hand that feeds them and plan a massive heist on the Mafia's own vaults. And they adopt the perfect disguise, masking themselves as vigilantes. The cynical plan ensures the Mafia hunts the heroes while they vanish with the cash. The corrupt cops' plan is already in motion, and the impact is immediate. They faked an attack so well choreographed that the footage went viral online, catching the attention of the entire vigilante scene. Using fake identities, the attack begins without warning. They handpick one of the Mafia's secret dirty money-counting houses. The squad breaches with absolute military precision. This isn't a hit by common thugs, but an extermination operation focused on clearing the field. They execute almost everyone, but strategically keep a final pawn conscious. The leader needs to extract the exact amount of the night's cash before finishing the job. The real masterstroke comes next. They use the footage to release a fake manifesto online, stealing the amateur hero's aesthetic to win over the media. The mind game works terrifyingly well. The city's real superhero team watches the video mesmerized, seeing the killers as inspiring idols instead of threats. The reality check hits the team right after. The resistance is shattered and demoralized, realizing they have nothing to offer compared to such a lethal squad. To worsen the crisis, their leadership is crumbling. The clearest sign that the group is sinking is that Dave, the team's very founder, has been skipping meetings at the most critical moment. The truth is that Dave isn't out patrolling on secret missions. The great vigilante abandoned the streets because his crime-fighting life got swallowed up by his new romantic relationship. His social isolation becomes complete. He uses all his free time to maintain this new bubble, discarding the old patrols with a clear conscience. Valerie became his safe haven. She turned into the anchor tethering Dave to normal reality, something he spent his whole life unsuccessfully trying to force. Dave takes a brutally honest look at himself and realizes the truth. The mask was just a coping mechanism for the unresolved grief over his mother's death. Now that he's happy, the alter ego has outlived its usefulness. But the timing of his retirement is terrible. While he locks himself away in the comfort of his new life, the team he created remains on the streets, amateur, and in the crosshairs of a lethal conspiracy. Pressured by his old friends, Dave tries to prove his loyalty. He swears he hasn't given up the double life and promises to help the team, hiding his own hesitation. But when it's time to commit, the crucial meeting slips his mind entirely. Between his strict duty to the team and his romance, his sense of responsibility loses out badly. Away from the masks, he starts expressing his good side through real, everyday actions. The self-confidence of being loved makes him feel that the dual identity is completely obsolete. However, this false sense of civilian invulnerability is quickly tested. During a date, life reminds him that good posture doesn't shield anyone from street thugs. The situation gets out of hand and turns into a cowardly verbal assault. The urban scum directly attacks Valerie's disability, testing Dave's limits. In that moment, not a shadow of the scared teenager remains. What shows in Dave's eyes is the pure coldness of someone who has taken beatings from mobsters and survived. Without needing to throw a single punch, he shifts the mood. His sheer aura of danger and dark tone of voice break the thugs' morale, forcing them to back down. The realization hits him in a liberating way. Dave understands that all those nights of suffering on the streets delivered the prize he always sought, the genuine courage to live in peace. But while the original hero finds his happy ending, the city collapses. The corrupt police squad intensifies the bloodbath to take over the Mafia's territories. The theft of fortunes reaches its breaking point. The big Mafia boss realizes the attack on his empire and decrees the total annihilation of whoever is stealing his money. The retaliation will feature no mercy or investigation. To the boss, there's no difference between the tactical cops and the team of teenagers. The order is to kill anyone wearing a superhero suit. Using dirty money, the cartel buys off the local authorities. A silent agreement is sealed, and the entire city turns into a lawless free-for-all hunting zone. Oblivious to the impending hell, the amateur members remain on the streets doing small community good deeds. They have no idea they've been dragged into a cartel war. The Mafia's attack is coordinated and lethal. Professional assassins begin actively tracking down the inexperienced vigilantes, exacting the toll for the million-dollar theft. The illusion of safety is violently shattered. The executions are immediate, proving that good intentions are useless against cold-blooded killers. Far from there, Dr. Gravity does his rounds exuding pride. He walks down the street completely exposed, believing blindly in his role as a neighborhood hero. His naivety makes him the perfect prey. He hears a cry for help and enters an alley, walking with a smile straight into the ambush. The mask of fake despair falls away, and the ambush is revealed. The hero's fearless facade evaporates as the shock of deadly reality paralyzes his body. The cowardly attack shatters the heroic fantasy through sheer brute force. Dr. Gravity pays with his own life for a scheme he was never involved in. Without the slightest remorse, the Death Squad crosses off the first name and charts their final route. The hunt for Dave's old friends is officially open, and they have no idea what's coming. The mind flashes back to a time when the idea of family fun was completely insane. The training was nothing but a lethal risk, but the promise of a mysterious reward turned everything into a childhood treasure hunt. The indoctrination was strong enough to maintain nerves of steel under the imminent weight of tons of moving metal. A fraction of an inch separated life from a bloodbath, marking the exact moment a normal childhood was crushed. In the ultimate leap of faith, blind trust in the plan's timing completely overrode the instinct for self-preservation. The secret prize revealed the bargaining chip. ultra-violent pop culture served to completely normalize the daily carnage. Rewarding suicidal acts with explicit violence cemented a corrupted morality. The killing machine had been forged. Back to the present, the girl is now undergoing a rigorous psychiatric evaluation in custody, where doctors try to understand her past. Memory brings back trips to the hardware store, where the shopping list steered clear of nails and went straight for dismemberment tools. But the psychiatrist doesn't care about the planning. He focuses on the core of the trauma, the psychological toll of the first real dead body. The flashback reveals that the final prep focused on long-range targets, creating a physical detachment meant to make the act easier. But when the moment of truth arrived, the weight of reality hit hard. Theory hadn't prepared the child for the irreversible act of taking a life, and she froze. Sensing her resistance, the father and mentor identifies the root of the problem: empathy. He needed to strip the humanity away from the victims. The trick was to mask reality, turning the human targets into cartoonish comic book villains. He sadistically lays down the rules, turning the environment into a ticking slaughterhouse to dictate the pace of the final test. To force a reaction, the scenario is flipped. The father intentionally places himself as a hostage in the hands of the targets. The pressure reaches a suffocating breaking point. Time runs out, and the responsibility of who lives and who dies falls entirely on the girl's shoulders. Forced to choose between preserving her humanity and saving her father's life, her mental block finally crumbles, and her innocence is buried right then and there. The devastation is instantaneous. The sick method proves to be an absolute success, obliterating the threats once and for all. Once the massacre is over, she realizes the deadly danger was never real. It was just a sick theater orchestrated to force her to pull the trigger. As the ultimate prize, the mentor hands over the identity that will replace her stolen childhood. The child gives way to the lethal machine once and for all. Back in the present, the psychiatrist rubs salt in the wound, focusing on the biggest lie that sustained the Vigilante's entire delusion of revenge. He reveals that her father manipulated her mother's memory to validate the carnage, linking maternal pride to the bloodshed. A lifeline is thrown. The doctor reveals that her mother is alive, understands that her daughter was a victim, and has already granted her forgiveness. By giving in and agreeing to the meeting, she takes her first real step out of her father's shadow. Her biological mother finally visits the girl in captivity, amidst a climate of extreme tension where the young woman is treated as a lethal weapon. Behind the two-way mirror, the government watches everything unfold like an experiment, hoping the maternal bond will break the prisoner's mental defenses. But the conversation takes a bizarre turn. The mother romanticizes the carnage, justifying that her daughter did to the scum what every citizen dreams of doing. Panic takes over the observation room. The handlers realize the mother's presence has just reignited her killer instinct. The system's intervention is immediate and aggressive, forcibly breaking up the meeting and dragging away the girl's only spark of genuine support. As she is dragged away, the mother leaves her final testament engraved in her daughter's mind: the order to never back down and never stop the war. On the city streets, the power vacuum brings consequences. Masked amateurs, desperate for attention, step into the crossfire. Without training, the heroic illusion is crushed by reality. There's no glamour, only collateral damage caused by kids playing with fire. Organized crime's retaliation is unforgiving, and dangerous syndicates begin capturing these supposed heroes as easy targets. In a grotesque misunderstanding, the attackers capture an amateur kid, believing him to be the leader of a rival faction. The aftermath is splashed across the news. The wave of amateur vigilantes has turned into a serial massacre, with the death toll rising. The true rot is revealed at the top levels, where criminals wear badges and watch from the front row as heroes die in their place. Reality crashes down on the kid who started the masked trend. The panic of losing friends to the slaughter he inspired hits home. A cruel dilemma paralyzes him: take to the streets as a scared civilian, or once again assume the vigilante identity that spawned this entire nightmare? The hesitation ends. He realizes he can no longer run, finally embracing the responsibility he tried to bury. He embraces the combat mindset and casts his fear aside, ready to face the consequences head-on in the streets. Meanwhile, in captivity, the news of the collapse doesn't break the girl. It only serves as fuel while she calculates how to turn the tables. But the system acts fast, and an abrupt intervention neutralizes any escape plans in a matter of seconds. On the other side, the crime syndicate demands zero tolerance, ordering extreme annihilation as a warning to any vigilantes. By buying off the authorities, the mob ensures the girl is silenced, turning the law into an instrument of crime itself. The chemical block ruthlessly does its job, leaving the prisoner completely vulnerable and stripped of her defensive instincts. The trap snaps shut for good when the arch nemesis is brought in specifically to witness his rival's capture. In this moment of total vulnerability, vulnerability. He now holds her life in his hands, needing just one move to end this war. The walls have completely closed in. Mindy, the lethal weapon who terrorized the underworld, is now nothing but a helpless trophy captured by the mob. Before the grand spectacle, the honor of the final blow is granted to her archenemy. It's the perfect chance for him to legitimize his position in the criminal underworld and avenge the past. But in an instant of sheer unpredictability, an absolute betrayal turns the tables. Alliances suddenly crumble, revealing that the target wasn't who the mob expected. Chaos takes over the scene. Instead of executing the girl, he initiates a ruthless inside-out purge, wiping out the corrupt old guard in the blink of an eye. The reality of the bloodbath finally sinks in, cracking the villainous facade. A brutal irony takes hold. Mindy's biggest threat has just become her unlikely salvation. With no time to process the twist, fleeing the scene becomes the only option. The city's two greatest rivals run side by side, united by the need to survive. Far away, the protagonist's patrolling isolation is suddenly broken. An unexpected contact pops up on the screen, serving as bait to pull him back into action. During the frantic escape, the trump card for survival is revealed. He made a massive gamble and sent a signal, certain that Dave would take the bait for the rescue. But the universe offers no respite, and reckless driving takes its toll. A distraction seals their fate with an immediate and brutal crash. The silence of the disaster sets in. Unconscious and defenseless, nature takes control of the situation, leaving them both minutes away from the end. However, the conditioned assassin's mind refuses to shut down. On the brink of death, her childhood trauma and extreme training force her body to react. Amidst the chaotic escape, she goes against all her rage and makes a moral choice. She uses her strength to save the life of the man responsible for her downfall. Even exhausted and fighting off the effects of drugs, she doesn't lose her strategic focus. Their only chance of rescue is to prepare and leave the right bait at the scene before passing out. Their isolation ends in the worst possible way. The trail of the disaster is found by the hunting party, destroying any hope of slipping by unnoticed. The camouflage fails, revealing the disparity in strength. The pursuer finds his weakened target and savors the chance to humiliate the fallen urban legend. But the apparent submission was merely the prelude to a trap. Using the environment to her advantage, her survival instinct explodes into an improvised counterattack. The bait works perfectly, opening a window for the arrival of unexpected backup. The arrogant mercenary is caught off guard and severely punished, turning the tables in an instant. To leave no loose ends, the hunter's fate is permanently sealed. The protective instinct overrides moral limits when an ally's life is on the line. Far from the blood and mud of the escape, the epicenter of crime stirs. The mob leadership prepares in grand fashion for the main event of the night. The unthinkable takes shape before everyone's eyes. Rival factions and formerly enemy syndicates converge in the same space, sealing a colossal alliance. Back to the heroes, they finally reach the safety of the safe house. It's the crucial moment to catch their breath, assess their wounds, and decide on the next move. Knowing her body is on the verge of collapse, she resorts to one of her father's emergency protocols, an extreme contingency in the form of an injection to force her body to keep fighting. Amidst the tension, contact with the normal world pulls Dave back. The voice on the other end begs for reason, holding him to his promises and asking him to run away from this hero life. But he crosses the point of no return and embraces the impending carnage. He accepts sacrificing his peace for a violent mission that could secure their tomorrow. His girlfriend delivers a desperate ultimatum to call the cops. She doesn't understand that this betrayal would quickly turn into a death sentence at the hands of the mob. Ignoring the external threats, they explore the bowels of the hideout. An absurd military infrastructure lay hidden, revealing secrets far beyond their expectations. The heavy security mechanism is activated. The massive doors open, granting access to the arsenal that will dictate the course of the final showdown. Meanwhile, the threat over the phone becomes a reality. The tip-off mobilizes the authorities, throwing the police force straight into the powder keg at the worst possible moment. Before them, the trump card hidden in the garage obliterates the word impossible, a resource so monstrous that turning the mob leadership into dust becomes a very real promise. The division of forces is drawn, one route to rescue the ally, another to attack the top of the mob with heavy artillery. Dave's intuition tells him that this separation feels a lot like goodbye. Realizing the gravity of it all, he decides to break through his partner's tactical armor. He offers rare and genuine human support to anchor her before they dive into hell. The emotional barrier gives way for a moment in a sincere embrace. Their exchange of warnings serves as a painful euphemism between two people who know they're unlikely to make it out alive. side. The pact of martyrdom is sealed. Their survival has become a secondary detail in the face of the urgency to destroy the criminal empire at all costs. With their path set, she heads toward the center of Mafia power. There's a terrifying, sarcastic lightness in the posture of someone who has already accepted their imminent sacrifice. Left alone to face his part in the war, the weight of responsibility is absolute. He clings to a blind faith in this insanity, hoping it will be enough to keep them alive until dawn. Mindy begins her part in the suicide attack. The strategy is clear. Use the sea route to strike directly at the Viper's nest before they even notice her arrival. Meanwhile, Dave swallows his fear and accelerates. He takes the front line on land, ready to become the diversionary force that will divide the enemy's attention. The target couldn't be more intimidating. It is a fortified complex housing the largest concentration of underworld targets the two have ever faced. Outside, the henchman's confidence is blind. With a private army on the perimeter, the guards are certain that no one would attempt an invasion. But Mindy strikes with surgical precision. She lethally neutralizes the first line of defense before any guard has a chance to call for backup. After clearing the entire courtyard by herself, the usefulness of the sole survivor becomes obvious. Since her body can't carry all the equipment's weight, the henchman is forced to serve as a pack mule. Far from there, Dave arrives at the exact moment to save his ally. He assesses the scene carefully before making his move, giving the green light for the rescue operation. Inside the headquarters, the Kingpin makes his speech to the crime syndicate. He promises to unify the gangs under his command, guaranteeing more profits in exchange for loyalty. Shock takes over the mobsters as they realize the blackmail. The leader has kidnapped the families of everyone present, neutralizing any opposition through sheer despair. But in this moment of triumph, the illusion of safety shatters. Mindy crashes through the structure, destroying the boss's untouchable facade in the blink of an eye. Mindy steps into the chaotic scene, taking full control. She isn't here to send a message, but to ensure the extermination is carried out to the bitter end. At the rescue site, Dave's distraction tactic works perfectly. The sudden chaos disorients the torturers, opening the window of opportunity to save his friend. Meanwhile, Mindy brings absolute lethality to the Mafia headquarters. For her, there is no heroic speech, only a military operation focused on eradicating threats without mercy. The true coldness of the operation reveals itself in the room. Mindy has flooded the hall with a heavy chemical gas, ensuring the criminals spend their final seconds in pure psychological terror. Back to Dave's fight, he makes a drastic decision to save his ally. Crossing a moral point of no return, he executes the enemy viscerally, becoming a brutal survivor. The gas's effect reduces the mob boss to cowardice and absolute tears. The terror breaks the criminal's mind, plunging him into despair before his end. Without hesitation, Mindy finishes the execution. The plan reaches its bloody climax, ensuring the crime syndicate has no chance of retaliation. Dave, on the other hand, makes the mistake of romanticizing his victory. Blinded by the euphoria of the rescue, he lowers his guard in a territory that is still extremely hostile. The price for his overconfidence comes immediately. The rest of the enemy contingent surrounds him with full force, turning the situation into an inescapable nightmare. Outside the complex, the authorities arrive with disproportionate force. The siege closes entirely around Mindy, taking away her room to maneuver. But soon, the nightmare reveals itself. That squad is, in fact, the Mafia's corrupt armed wing. What looked like an arrest becomes an imminent extrajudicial execution. Meanwhile, the physical humiliation annihilates Dave's hopes. Every blow from the henchman destroys his resistance, turning the heroic rescue into rock bottom. Broken, Dave is swallowed by regret. He feels he threw his own future in the trash because of a childish fantasy, believing it to be the end of the line. However, a memory surfaces to change everything. He remembers that hero stories are about unshakable optimism and finding a solution when everything seems impossible. The epiphany hits Dave, who starts analyzing the situation with a tactical eye. He spots hidden advantages in the scenery, proving that the environment can be the key to turning the tables. His improvised trap is triggered to perfection. Intelligence overcomes brute force, erasing the enemy's huge numerical advantage in a single calculated strike. Mindy reveals her true plan to the cops. Their supposed ambush was a bait orchestrated by her, with the intention of gathering all the corrupt officers in one place. The consequence of Mindy's hidden planning explodes. In the blink of an eye, the corrupt army surrounding her is wiped from existence. With the captain subdued, Mindy makes her decision. Execution would be a waste, so she turns that broken man into a tool to expose the rest of the corruption. She takes full control of the interrogation. Mindy warns that the night is just getting started and that he will give up every detail of the scheme. Away from the carnage, relief washes over Dave. He receives the news that his teammate is going to survive, proving the rescue wasn't in vain. His girlfriend realizes what he did and falls apart. She concludes that his adrenaline addiction has destroyed the chance of a stable life, expecting him to abandon her for vigilantism. But Dave makes his definitive decision, choosing love over war. Fulfilling his internal pact, he decides that this was his last mission and retires. The local crime empire was successfully broken. With the threats wiped off the map, Dave finally has a clear path to live his romance guilt-free. The Mafia survivor is so broken that he decides to become an informant. He gives up the entire network of corrupt cops, ensuring the system is cleaned up. Mindy, on the other hand, can't stop. She turns revenge into a global crusade, crossing the globe to annihilate cartels and become a brutal legend in the shadows. Dave dives headfirst into normality. He leaves his double life behind and focuses entirely on his stability and building an ordinary domestic life. Still, his desire to impact society hasn't died, only evolved. Dave decides to channel his energy into making a difference through a legitimate path. Taking advantage of the corrupt system's purge, Dave joins the rebuilt police force. He seizes the chance to help establish a new era of order, now as an official part of the solution. Civilian life brings a liberating peace for Dave. He goes back to enjoying his nerd passions merely as a hobby, at peace with the end of his personal war. Except, while he enjoys the calm, the global scene begins to collapse. Anomalies and threats emerge on an absurd scale, raising the stakes of the game. Dave's old suicide experiment served as a catalyst. He proved that complacency wasn't the only option, inspiring a movement that would change the very fabric of humanity. People reject ordinary reality, but no longer in amateur costumes. They use heavy resources and engineering to materialize what was once fiction. The population's apathy is shattered in the face of these figures. The public witnesses real heroes breaking the laws of normality in the streets. This is Kick-Ass's definitive victory. His greatest triumph was taking the first courageous step to turn the age of heroes into a stunning reality.